Welcome, you are listening to the Twice Over Movies podcast. In these first few episodes, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes explaining who we are and what we're doing with this podcast and website. So as you can tell, this podcast is specifically about movies. My name is Faraz and I'll be hosting each episode alongside a rotating co-host between Fahad, Yousuf, and Farhan. Each episode is for one movie. We will spend 10 to 20 minutes discussing our scores without giving away any major spoilers. Afterwards, we will have a spoiler alert, and then we will dive into a deeper discussion into the movie. And that will go as long as it goes, maybe 15 to 45 additional minutes. Our scores are broken into 5 segments of a movie. First, acting, defined as the execution of the writing and story by the actors. Second, direction and plot, defined as the entertainment value, pace, and audience connection. Third is the writing, which is defined as primarily the dialogue. Fourth is the cinematography and photography, defined as the visual appeal of the movie. Fifth, themes and motifs, defined as the presentation of the underlying message and/or idea. For each of these categories, we assess if it was substantive, purposeful, logical, engaging, satisfying, clear, consistent, etc. This is where the website comes into play. Depending on how you order the importance of the categories mentioned, you will get a composite score indicating the strength of the movie on your standards. Currently, you will see a score based only on how the host rated the movie, but we have every intention to include you into the process to add a community score alongside the host score. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, continue listening, and support us. Now on to the episode.
So, did we pass?
What's that? What did you say?
The poly thing, the lie detector we took this morning. Did we pass?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, we appreciate your cooperation.
It's embarrassing, all this fuss. Everyone's gonna think we're crazy when those two come out of hiding wherever they are.
Do you have some reason to believe they ran away?
No. They're happy. They must have run away. They must have run away, right?
Welcome everyone to the Twice Over Movies podcast. Today we are discussing Prisoners 2013 movie directed by Denis Villeneuve. I'm your host Faraz and
I'm Yousuf. What it do, baby?
It do pretty good, man. We got a good movie we got today, so it's going to be a good discussion.
I agree.
So this movie was picked by you, Yousuf. So you want to tell us any reason why you picked this movie?
So I'm generally a fan of thrillers, and I think this is a thriller that it really gets a lot right. It has a lot of the elements of a typical thriller, but beyond that, it's just a pretty complete movie, in my opinion. And so I thought I'd get your thoughts on this one as well. So is this your first time seeing this, or have you seen it before?
No, I had seen this before. I watched this in the theaters. Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite directors, so I usually follow most of his movies. And yeah, you classified it as a thriller. I would put it more as a mystery movie. But obviously it's also a thriller, but it's like a slow burn with like proper thriller elements within it. It's just a very, very well made, great movie. So I get why you would pick it and I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's no cheap tricks in the way that they pull off this movie, like there are for, a lot of thrillers. Generally, they take their time with this one. So.
Okay, so let's get started with the scores. I'll get started. We said we'll discuss acting first. My score for acting was a 95. I thought this was a near perfect movie when it comes to just the acting. The only reason I didn't give it 100 is because there's some child actors, and I'm not saying that they were bad or anything, but they're just good. But the main characters, played by Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal, these guys were phenomenal. Probably the best acting for either of them that I've ever seen. But yeah, so what do you think about the acting?
I have it as a 95 as well, man. This is a pretty impressive cast. Jake Gyllenhaal, Hugh Jackman, we got Viola Davis, Terrence Howard, and some Melissa Leo, if you're familiar with her. I wasn't very familiar, but she's another very good actor. So like they've got a pretty complete cast here. I do think you can be a little bit nitpicky, and there's some points that maybe you could take issue with, but overall, yeah, I mean, these guys, not only are they individual actors at a high level, but they play off of each other really well in this movie. You can really see a lot of chemistry, especially between Jake Gyllenhaal and Hugh Jackman. And Jake Gyllenhaal, I mean, I struggle to think of a movie that I haven't really enjoyed his performances, but you're right. This is, prime Jake Gyllenhaal acting. So I really thought that they killed it, and especially, working off each other as foils, they were great. You could take issue again, yeah, with the child acting maybe, but that's a minor issue to me. So
It is. I mean, we're giving it a 95.
they were definitely sufficient for the roles they were playing.
Well, speaking of Jake Gyllenhaal, right? So he has a pretty similar role that he had in Zodiac, but it's also so distinctly different because he's also a detective in Zodiac as well, right? Trying to solve something that's going on.
He finds himself in these like creepy movies a lot, and sometimes he's the creepy guy like in Nightcrawler, and sometimes he's adjacent to it like in this or in Zodiac. And yeah, he brings a lot to the character as a detective, a lot of specifics that really dive into the mind of the character. So yeah, it's really different from what he portrayed in Zodiac, but just as impressive, I thought. And Hugh Jackman, on the other hand, shows a different kind of. I mean, you know, Jake Gyllenhaal shows you a lot of the persistence that you expect of a detective, and then Hugh Jackman kind of shows you a different side of things. He's a survivalist in this movie essentially, and so he has this attitude of handling everything on his own and being responsible for his family and not relying on anybody, not even relying on society really. So I mean, he brings kind of a I don't know, like a grisly nature to his character, I guess I want to say, and those two kind of butt heads a lot, and just again, like it was kind of phenomenal to see them go back and forth.
Let's talk about the direction and the plot. I gave this an 85. I thought it was, like I said, we said it's a mystery slash thriller movie. And considering that, the way that the story keeps the audience engaged, it's like you're at the edge of your seat for most of the movie. It's paced very well, laying down clues here and there, but it's like subtle, so you're not, it doesn't give anything away. There's very little confusion, but still there's questions that you have as an audience. And it's just very well done. And then there's the, like, what I mean by pacing is you have that slow burn of trying to solve this mystery, but then you have like the thriller aspect of when things start picking up really fast.
I went full 100 on this one, man.
Good stuff.
I'm channeling my inner Faran. So, but like, look, like this movie, I thought the story and the way that the direction is carried out in this movie is really special. There are a lot of red herrings, which is good for kind of a mystery thriller type movie, but I didn't feel like any of that was wasted. Every element that is brought into the story kind of plays a role, and it all pieces together pretty well like a puzzle. I want to get into some specific sequences that I thought were just amazingly done, so we'll definitely do that. But there's almost a balance here where things tie up very neatly in a way that's like I was tempted to think like, man, this is kind of annoyingly neat, like it's too perfect. But the problem is that, I mean, not the problem, but the reason I didn't find that a problem is that they don't kind of wave that around in your face, right? It's not obvious what's really going on. Nothing is given away too much. But, when you kind of sit back and look at the bigger picture after you watch the whole movie, there's not a wasted scene in my opinion. So I love the way that the story unfolds, and the way that it's presented on screen. I thought it was just phenomenal.
I get it. I get it. I can see why you would give it 100. My only like real gripe with it is that it wasn't so unique.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. Well, we can talk about it more. But I thought it was kind of Chekhov's gun at its finest, right? Chekhov's gun being just the concept that every element that you bring into a story should play a larger role somewhere later in the story, right? If you hang up a gun on the wall in one scene, then that gun needs to be fired before the end of the movie. And so, I mean, I thought that is executed perfectly in this movie. So yeah, I had to go full 100 on this one. So
All right, so writing is up next. Writing, I gave this a 80. The writing was, again, it's a quiet movie. It pushes the story. It packs in a lot in like what very little is generally said if you think about it. But the only reason it's an 80 and not like above that is I didn't think like the story that is pushing is so unique in itself that it deserved a higher score.
yeah, that's still an above average score. So I went 90 on this. I thought a lot of the dialogue is really good. There's a lot of conversation that goes on in this movie that kind of just demonstrates kind of the confrontation of like the sets of belief between the characters, right? And the conflicts there, and that's kind of a rolling thing throughout the entire movie, right? Kind of the different sets of beliefs that each character brings to the screen and how they deal with that, uh, in the midst of the horrible situation they find themselves in. And on the other hand, they also do a lot without any dialogue. To your point, right? They use silence in a really good way. So, they don't end up wasting any dialogue. Uh, I thought that kind of those two things put together kind of make all the dialogue really special to me. So, yeah, I went with a 90. I can see, yeah, there's some things that, we can probably get into that, maybe are not so special, but overall, I thought they did a good job of just, again, putting value in every piece of dialogue that they put on the screen. So,
Yeah, and you mentioned in your writing score in the description that the themes and motifs that they have in the dialogue and what it leads to. So let's talk about the themes and motifs. I give this an 85. It's obviously a pretty big element of the movie. And it's in your face a little bit in the beginning, especially like it starts with like the Lord's Prayer when they're hunting outside. And then you just have a lot of symbolism when it comes to like these pendants, these mazes, the cross. Like it's really like in your face. Like you're supposed to see that it is playing a big role in the movie itself, in the story. So it's a big element of the movie. With that said, I gave it an 85. I thought it was pretty well done. The only reason it's not like higher than an 85 is I just thought it was a little too in your face.
okay, fair enough. I had this as a 95, so I'm pretty high on this one too. There is a lot going on in terms of themes and motifs. Particularly, there's a lot of there's a lot of playing out of kind of different types of mental strife across different walks of life in this movie, and I thought they did a really good job of portraying how we all deal with crisis differently. And I mean, the thing that was impressive to me is that I'm not talking about like just seeing two contrasting examples of how people deal with crisis. I think there's about 10 examples of how people deal with things in different ways, and how they deal with anguish in this movie. So every character kind of has a different perspective on that, and I really thought that they did a good job of never getting away from that, and not being repetitive in what they were showing you. So I thought that there's a lot going on in terms of the themes and motifs. There's a lot of characters that you don't want to feel sorry for, but you do in the end. There's a lot of conflicting feelings here. So that all plays out because of, again, just the way that people deal with things in life, right? So I thought it was kind of a true depiction of the complexities.
I mean, I agree with you like 90% of what you said. The only thing that you said I don't agree with, I did feel like it was a little repetitive. I mean, I get it. Like you only have to show it to me like once or twice, not like every fifth scene. Like, oh, okay, I get it. This guy's very Christian. He's trying to morally explain his behavior, which is not good behavior. Clearly, it's immoral behavior. But like, I thought it was a little repetitive. Still very well done. Still very good.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with you there. There is a lot of pushing forth the Christianity, right? And I guess so. Particularly with Hugh Jackman's character, there is a bit of repetition in him trying to convey kind of his mantra, I guess. So
Exactly.
I definitely did see that now that you mention it. So yeah, fair enough.
All right, photography and cinematography. You mentioned during the direction and plot stuff that it was so perfect. I kind of felt that about the photography and cinematography. Like the colors, the shots, the feel, like the staging, everything was just so purposeful. It was consistent. It felt just in perfect line with the story. So I did give it a 95. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. It's just super, super well done.
Yeah, I gave it a 90 as well. I thought it was really good. The movie, well, first of all, had to operate in the dark quite a lot, but I didn't feel like I lost much in terms of the picture by doing that. In fact, that only enhanced kind of my experience there. And then, in contrast, there's also a lot of these beautiful shots, kind of showing, I don't know, like idyllic suburbia, basically, and that's in extreme juxtaposition with the nature of the situation that the characters are working through. So I mean, there was kind of really good contrast there, I thought. So they did a really good job, not only with the dark scenes, but also the light scenes, and kind of showing a contrast between the good and bad in life constantly. I thought they did a really good job with that. So yeah, I gave it a 90. And yeah, you went even higher. So there you go.
All right, so that concludes our scoring portion of the episode. Now we're going to get into the actual discussion, in which there are a ton of spoilers. So this is your fair warning for a spoiler alert. Prisoners is a story of two young girls, Anna and Joy, who are kidnapped on a Thanksgiving afternoon in suburban Pennsylvania. Anna's father, Keller, a devout Christian and a survivalist, is not happy with how Detective Loki and the police department are going about finding the girls. The police immediately find a suspect, Alex Jones, and his RV where we saw the girls playing on Thanksgiving Day. But the police let him go due to the lack of evidence connecting Alex directly to the girls. But Keller decides he's going to kidnap Alex and question him because he's convinced Alex knows something. In the meantime, we have another young man, Bob Taylor, who is a potential suspect. He is later arrested for having bloody children's clothes at his home. That ends up being a false flag, and through Keller's further torture of the kidnapped Alex, we are led to Alex's aunt's house, whose name is Holly. And indeed, she ends up being the one who actually kidnapped the girls. Alright, now that you guys know how the story goes, let's get into the discussion of it. So, Yousuf, what part of the story do you want to start with? Did you want to start with the acting?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Let's start with the acting. Let's get into that. So, like we talked about at the top of the show, I thought Jake Gyllenhaal and Hugh Jackman were, amazing in this movie. You get a lot of contrast between their two characters. I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal being the by the book detective, and Hugh Jackman being this guy who pretty much sees himself as fending for himself in this world, and is willing to do whatever he feels is necessary to protect his interests, particularly protect his family, which is kind of at the center of his character. So you're constantly seeing the back and forth between them, and I thought that was fascinating to see on screen, because quite frankly they're not the most different characters, but that one trait of theirs kind of creates a huge amount of contrast.
Yeah, I get what you're saying here, because as different as these two characters are, Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Detective Loki, and Keller Dover, Hugh Jackman's character, they're so alike in the sense that they both are so sure of themselves in what they are doing. Like, Detective Loki is confident that he knows what he's doing. When he goes out for like questioning and stuff, when the girls initially get kidnapped, you can kind of see like this arrogance that he has with him when he's like taking notes, when I think it's Keller who's like, "Hey, shouldn't you be writing this down?" And he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure." Because he's thinking to himself, like, "All right, these guys are giving me useless
Yeah,
information."
that's in the scene where he goes to the Dover household, because the wife Grace says that she thinks her daughter came home and then left through the window, and so he goes there and he knows this is BS. He's looking at the pills on the counter and he's thinking, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and she's like, "Yeah, aren't you gonna write this down?" And then he kind of takes out his pad and he's like, "Open window."
Yeah, reluctantly just write something
Yeah,
down for the
yeah.
sake of it. But like he has this in him because they tell us early on that Detective Loki has never had a case that hasn't been solved. So like be confident that he'll figure this out. He'll find your daughters, this and that. He has this pride that he's like walking with, but at the same time, you can tell he's like unsure. Just the same way this is comes into the themes and motifs, the same way that Keller's character, or sorry, Hugh Jackman's character Keller, like they are so sure of themselves that when they have to question what they're doing, like they seem to kind of lose it, and like it starts unraveling in front of them. We see this culminate with Detective Loki when Bob shoots himself and he's dead, and Detective Loki is just totally lost and doesn't know where the case is at now. He's just looking at that maze that Bob was working on, goes over to his desk and like just lets his frustration out. And at the same time, you have Keller who's torturing Alex, and he has him enclosed in that, like, I guess, like a bathtub or like a standing shower, basically, with this hot water, and he's just burning him with the water, and he's like losing it. He's like, "Why are you making me do this?" Yeah, it's these guys like played these roles so well. in my opinion, the best part of the movie, and I think my score like reflects
You
that.
highlighted two scenes that were really hard to watch as well, you know? Like, I mean, you can feel them, you know, they've kind of gone beyond their internal limits to a degree there, right? You know, Keller with, you know, torturing Alex Jones in the shower, and then Loki, who is very much by the book, but he loses it in the interrogation room with Bobby Taylor, is that his name?
Yeah.
With the other interrogation suspect. And so, I mean, they're getting pushed beyond their limits there. And yeah, so those two scenes were so difficult to watch, but you can really feel the characters struggling with where they're ending up morally, or you know.
What do you think about so let's talk about the themes and motifs a little bit here. So you have Keller who's dealing with this moral dilemma. He has now kidnapped someone. Well, first of all, no one believes like what he heard. So when Detective Loki and like the police department let Alex go, and Keller goes up to him and basically wants to talk to him man to man, but he's clearly super aggressive in doing so. That the cops have to pull him off, but Alex does say something, right?
He says they didn't start crying until I left them, and
Exactly, yeah.
yeah, that's an admission that he was with the girls.
So like when Keller has like he gets so fixated that that's enough for him now to go and cross some lines that are clearly immoral. But he has like a reason that he's doing it and he's justifying it. But like how that flows with his religion, his faith, and how he's still trying to convince himself. And then you also see it come together when he brings Terrence Howard's character Franklin, Joy's dad, into the picture and tells him like, "Hey, I've got Alex. I'm trying to get information out of him." And Franklin's just like, "Yo, what are you doing? Like, we got to leave it to the cops. Like, if you think he knows something, you need to tell the cops that." But yeah, so Franklin is not about it. He can't seem to convince himself that what Keller is doing is appropriate. It's actually his wife, played by Viola Davis, Nancy, who says, like, we won't do anything. We'll just let Keller do his thing. It's just an interesting dilemma that we find Keller in, because he's this super religious guy who is breaking all the rules of morality for the purpose of finding his daughter. So it's not like he's doing it for immoral purpose. It's just what he is doing is immoral.
He's been pushed into it, but he honestly, to a degree, I don't know how you feel about this, but I felt that Hugh Jackman portrayed Keller in a way that was, I mean, he was almost familiar in the situation that he was in. You know, obviously there was a morality struggle there because he is a very religious person. He's constantly reciting prayers in, you know, every kind of quiet moment. But at the same time, he didn't have trouble jumping into this, you know, into this role that he was pushed into, right? He's ready to break the rules, you know. Once he realizes that it has to be done, he's just ready to do it. On the other hand, Franklin is kind of the moral voice here. And I thought their two characters, I mean, that's kind of what you are constantly seeing when you have the two of them on screen, is the morality struggle there, right? I mean, Birch is constantly trying to draw the lines, and he's like, "This is wrong. We can't be doing this." And Keller just tells him, "No, look, it's this guy or it's our daughters." And that you know, that's brought up several times. To your point, I mean, it's almost repetitive to a degree. But you know, he's a survivalist. He's trained himself to take matters into his own hands, and he doesn't feel really any remorse for that. On the other hand, Franklin is totally uncomfortable with it, and it's only his wife who actually, you know, makes him a little bit more comfortable with it, because Franklin's morality eventually bends, right? Because him and his wife Nancy, right, they settle on, you know, we're not going to help him anymore, but we won't stop him either. You know, as far as we're concerned, we don't know about this anymore, is actually what Nancy says. And so he has this moral compass that he's trying to reconcile, but you know, the situation and the tension of the situation, you know, eventually makes him bend there too. Not all the way like Keller, but you know, he does give in to you know, and meets him halfway there. So I mean, I thought that was really interesting to watch. And you know, there's kind of another aspect that plays into this, which is Keller clearly feels a degree of ineptitude here, right? So, like you were saying earlier, they feel so sure in what they're doing. Keller does and Loki does. They're so sure that the decisions that they've made are the ones that, are the most effective in the situation, that they're making the right call. But at the same time, you can see that they're uncertain whether they are moving forward in the right path or whether they're going to make it out of this situation. And that's Keller. For Keller, it's the ineptitude of a father, right? His inability to keep his daughter safe, and he takes that out on Loki a lot. Franklin, on the other hand, he's more consigned, I think, to the reality of what's going on. I thought it was kind of, I did note at one point that if Franklin, as a black man, was doing what Keller was doing and just, shoving cops out of the way and attacking a witness or, somebody who had just been let out of custody, he would not be doing so well, So
Yeah, he probably would have been put in jail like at the first instance of it, and he wouldn't have anything else going on.
exactly. So, I mean, they have different practicalities that are playing into this as well. I mean, just Keller is essentially this hardened character who not only knows that he needs to do whatever he has to do, but is comfortable doing that, and he thinks he's okay doing whatever he has to do, breaking whatever rules he has to break. And Franklin does not operate in the same way. He draws the lines much more solid lines, and he's not willing to cross them. So that was a really interesting struggle to watch. I thought that their acting was really good on that point, and yeah, it was really conveyed throughout the movie as a constant theme.
Well, we also learned from like Keller's upbringing when Detective Loki is searching into his past after Alex disappears again, which is Keller kidnapping him. So Detective Loki's looking into it, and he sees that Keller's father had committed suicide, who was a cop in the city. He had a place, the apartment building where Alex is being held, and we see that Keller has that building is like deteriorating, it's abandoned. He hasn't put any time and effort into fixing it up, so like we can assume that that suicide, Keller was in his teens when that happened. He hasn't grown out of what the suicide did to him. Like, it's still a part of who he is. Maybe that's what hardened him initially. It's what made him so independent and like you said, a survivalist, because he didn't have a father after his teen years.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually wanted to talk about that. I mean, I had kind of an interesting thought as I was unpacking those scenes. Maybe this is going a little too far, but I thought there might be an underlying assumption there that Keller had something to do with his father's death. It seems like Keller does not have the best memories of his father. And to your point, he was probably very young when his father supposedly committed suicide. But, in the very opening scene of the movie, he's telling his son, Ralph, as they're, driving back from a hunt, he's like, like, if there's one good thing that my father, that your grandfather, taught me, it's that you got to be prepared for anything. You got to be able to handle any situation when things go wrong. And, so that is where he picked up his survivalism from. That suggests that he doesn't even, rely on anyone, including his family, right? He takes everything into his own responsibility. There's some weird tones here because Keller clearly has some stuff going on. I mean, he has some dark past, right? Because I thought he was too comfortable doing what he was doing, like, without any hesitation. And then the other thing, when Loki is actually looking up that article that talks about Keller's dad's suicide, it actually mentions, it just says he was found in an apparent suicide in his home. There was no suicide note that was found associated with the death. And so he kind of mentions all of that. And then I also did think it was a kind of a weird contrast that, Keller, who is this super organized, super prepared guy, is just letting this entire, building just in this, he's leaving it in this deteriorated, just decrepit state, and he's not renovating it or anything. And then you see the way that his like basement is like super organized. And
Yeah, Detective Loki, he mentions it, right? He's like, not as organized as your basement.
yeah, so like I don't know. I just got this weird vibe from there that, like, and I mean, maybe they focused on it a little bit. They did zoom in on it a bit, but I thought there's something there. I don't want to say, yeah, Keller killed his father. Maybe he did, but like that might be a little bit of a jump. But it just seemed like there's something going on there. There's some sort of darker past that Keller is not dealing with, and it's kind of lingering over him. And I think that like kind of comes out in this movie, in this situation, right? He jumps back into his survivalist role in the snap of a finger, right?
All right, Yusuf, tell me, did you see the ending coming? Well, I shouldn't say the ending. Did you see Holly being the kidnapper?
I did not. I mean, it's I wouldn't say that it's completely impossible to predict, because she is a character who is on screen for you know a decent amount of the film, and her nephew Alex Jones is the one who is under the most scrutiny throughout the movie. So she's just adjacent to him. But I didn't really point my finger at her, and it wasn't until it wasn't until her confrontation with Keller, or I suppose actually, when Joy wakes up in the hospital, that's when the puzzle pieces kind of started fitting together in my mind, and they all fall together so quickly once you once you catch on a little bit. It's really easy to see these things falling into place. But yeah, I mean, did you see it coming? I didn't. It wasn't given away to me, and it definitely didn't ruin the film, because her acting is, I thought she walked a really good line between, what am I trying to say? She walked a really good line between, being a little bit eerie and being a little bit dark, but not taking that, yeah, not taking that too far. There was like kind of an innocence that you felt sorry for her throughout the movie, and but neither of those things were to an extreme. So she played her character just perfectly, that you could see her being this this demon in the end. You didn't see that coming until it was kind of told on the screen. So I thought she walked the line perfectly there.
Yeah, so I didn't see it coming, but it didn't surprise me either. Like you
Hmm.
said, you once you look back, like, oh yeah, she was definitely creepy. She was not. She has something that she was hiding for sure. Only time, I mean, I think it became obvious right before Joy is in the hospital is when Keller goes for the first time to her place to just to talk to her, because this is after he's losing hope with Alex, because Alex is not giving enough information. Actually, Alex has just mentioned like the mazes. So Keller goes over and he mentions the mazes or something about a maze to
Yeah.
Holly, and Holly has a reaction that kind of tells you like, oh, she knows what he's talking about here. But I thought it was, I mean, they have that good diversion with Bob and Bob Taylor's entire like fixation with role playing a kidnapper, where he gets like mannequins and buries them. He's the one who sneaks into Joy and Anna's house to like steal a piece of their clothing. One thing I didn't get about like Bobby Taylor's entire story was I didn't get the snakes bit, that he has these snakes in his house. That was a good diversion where I was pretty convinced it was him, especially when they say, "Oh, we got clothes, positive identification by the parents." But then you find out that the blood there was not any human blood; it was pig blood, and that's like where we see, oh, Detective Loki or Grace Dover's information about, oh, she thinks Anna came in the house and left, was actually very important, because that's how Detective Loki figures out, oh, that's how Bob got like the clothes. It's not that he did
Yeah,
anything.
somehow I had kind of forgotten about that. I had kind of just, in the whole sequence of watching the parents identify the clothing and everything, in my head I was just like, well, there's no way around that. He had the clothing, and it totally did not occur to me that we just watched somebody sneak into their homes, and creep around in the children's bedrooms. So yeah, that kind of, maybe I should have realized that, but that caught me by surprise a little bit. That was the perfect distraction to kind of take the eyes off of Holly Jones in those moments where where Keller is kind of doing his penance.
And another part of the story that, I mean, you had to know it was significant when it happened. When he finds that dead body in the priest's home, like in the cellar or whatever,
Yeah.
like behind the fridge, clearly that was something significant, because out of all the sex offenders that he's looking at, he finds this one body, and it's just like a mystery death. Obviously, I'm sure most people who watched the movie like had the idea like, all right, this is gonna come back somewhere, and we find out that this happens to be Holly's late husband. We never are told what happens to the priest, right? The priest just like, I guess they arrest him and keep him in jail. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, like, in terms of the story, like they have these droppings of clues here and there, And then they had the distraction of Bob to make you think that maybe he's involved. But yeah, so we have the dead body, and then the priest says that this person came to him to confess. They confessed that they had killed over like 15 or like 16 children. I don't remember this right now, but did the guy tell the priest like, hey, I don't want to like live anymore or something, like I want you to kill me? Or did the priest decide like, whoa, you did all this bad stuff, I'm gonna kill
Yeah,
you?
I think the priest suggests that the guy came to him for confession, but also, made it clear that he wasn't going to be able to stop, that he was going to kill more. And so the priest convinces him to come back to his house and deals with him. So I think that was, the priest taking things into his own hands. It wasn't it wasn't the, well, this is Holly Jones's husband, right? That we find out later. So, but it's not him, giving in and saying, I can't live with myself anymore. It was very much the priest taking things into his own hands. And the priest actually, says, this is much earlier in the movie, before we hear Holly Jones say the same exact words, but the priest says, he said he was waging a war with God. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize the significance of that, of course, at the moment. But yeah, thinking back, you kind of had to know that that was going to play in. I mean, we're talking about a kidnapping, and then we just come across a priest who killed a man for doing 16 kidnappings and murders of children. So it had to be significant somehow, I suppose.
Well, they also had, we talked about Bob's like distraction, but they definitely made it seem like Alex was very involved. I mean, we know he was involved, but he is clearly mentally handicapped, so we know he wasn't alone in it. But we have when Keller obviously confronts him at the police station, and he says that thing about they didn't cry until I
Yeah.
left them. And then later, Keller is like sneaking around their house, or not sneaking around. He's just waiting outside, just scoping the house. And we see Alex come out with the dog, and he like chokes the dog, right? He like picks him up with the leash, and then he starts humming the Jingle Bells or singing it, the same like Batman version that the kids were singing on
Yeah.
Thanksgiving. So it makes it like so clear to us as the audience, like, all right, this guy was definitely
Right.
involved. And it kind of gives you the excuse, like, all right, so what Keller is about to do here, which is kidnap him. Like he has like every right to do that. Like these three like sequences of they didn't cry until I left them. This kid is clearly demented in the sense that he's just choking this dog for no reason, and then he's singing that Jingle Bells. It's like it goes from one set to the next set of clues to either divert you or bring you closer. It's really doing both because we see it all ties back together. Like Bob Taylor is involved with the whole Holly and her husband, like the kidnapping stuff. Alex is one of the first kids to be kidnapped. Like I don't know, it's just so well done, and this like goes into the direction and plot which you gave 100. And like thinking back, like how well it was like paced throughout all of this, pretty complicated but very clear while you're watching it, with the mystery element there, like a proper amount of it, like it's not too confusing, like I said. It's just really good, man.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I
really,
just
really good.
appreciate that everything actually did come together, but there, nobody stands on screen at any point and connects all the dots for you, but it's there. You can piece it together. There's something I really have to appreciate about that, especially because, like I said, typically something that comes together like annoyingly perfectly, like it would almost, it's like too perfect and you're kind of annoyed by it, but I didn't feel that at all. Especially, I think that does factor in because you don't have somebody narrating what just happened on screen. So I think that helps. But I thought everything comes together like a puzzle piece, and that there's something definitely to appreciate there. And to your point, I mean, the reason that the distractions are so good, of Alex Jones, of Bobby Taylor, I mean, these guys are really good at playing mentally disturbed characters, right? I mean, Alex Jones does an excellent job. I mean,
Most definitely.
you
Most
are
definitely.
convinced the whole way that there's something messed up about this guy, and there is, but it turns out not really to be the sinister thing that we thought, at least not from his perspective. And on the other hand, Bobby Taylor is played by I'm going to try this name, David Dastmalchian. and I don't know if you recognized him, but I've seen him in one thing before, and that's The Dark Knight. And in that movie, he plays a paranoid schizophrenic who is attracted to the Joker. And eventually, he's the one that confronts Harvey. And lets him know that we have your wife, and Harvey snaps and takes him into an alley and threatens him with a gun, and that's kind of the unraveling of his character in both those movies. I mean, he plays this mentally disturbed individual so well. I mean, I was creeped out from the second I saw him on screen before he even did anything of note. And so, I mean, these guys really they take your attention off of everyone else in a way that, I mean, I don't think the movie functions as well as it does without their acting. And then as things wind down and Bobby Taylor is being interrogated by Loki, and eventually shoots himself in the mouth. I mean, at the same time, I felt so bad for him. And you can't really explain it, because at this point, it doesn't make sense to sympathize with him, because at this point we're led to believe that he's the one who murdered the children.
Yeah, we're pretty like convinced of it
Yeah,
at this
and
point.
like, I mean, I couldn't explain that at the time. It's just his acting that I felt like a deep sympathy for him in that moment. But can we get into this? Can we talk about exactly what goes on with each of these characters, and what their backstories are? Because I mean, I thought that, like, there's a lot of character depth going on here, but you can't really piece it all together until you have all the parts working in conjunction. So once you know what's going on at the end, then you can really see what's going on with each of these characters. So let's dive into that.
How do you want to do this? Do you want to go through Holly and her husband's like story, and then as we get to each
Yeah, I think
character,
that
talk
makes
about
sense,
that
because they are
character?
the ones who kind of push everything into motion, and their story begins well before everyone else's. So, I mean, let's start there, right? So, Holly and her husband, they have a son, and they are very devout, right? They live out of an RV. They're going around handing out religious materials on the road in the summers, and their son, their very young son, gets cancer, and he eventually dies from it, we're led to believe. And that kind of breaks them, right? That breaks their faith in
Yeah.
God. They can't understand why that would, it's such a hard thing to deal with, and they can't understand, why a just God would let that happen. That's something that we hear a lot, but I mean, it's true. When you go through that strife, it's hard to understand, how something could happen to an innocent child like that. And so that breaks them, and that breaks their faith in God. And not only that, it makes them want to lash out against God, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's when they decide, all right, we're going to wage a war against God himself. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to take away from other people, like God took away from them, which is they're going to go and kidnap kids. And okay, so we know that the body that we find at the priest's house was Holly's late husband. He says there was over 16 kids that they kidnapped and killed. So if that's 16 that they killed, then we also know one of the first ones that they kidnapped was Alex Jones. He was his real name was Barry, and he was kidnapped at a young age. And clearly, I mean, I don't know if it's like a true like genetic mental handicap that Alex has, or it's just the way that they raised him is that they stunted his like mental growth, right? So we have him. He's one of the first ones. They basically tell him like, "Hey, you're our nephew." And then we have Bob Taylor, who is another one of them that they kidnap, but they don't kill him. I assume he got away. 'Cause I don't think they let the kids go. It's just that they either
I
get
think Bob
away.
Taylor, yeah, I think Bob Taylor was just, an early mistake, and so he gets away after 3 weeks, is what Loki tells us, right? Loki mentions that Bob Taylor was kidnapped as a child, and he got away after 3 weeks. He was heavily drugged, and they never caught the guy who did it. So, that is basically, one of their early kidnappings that just doesn't work out. The kid gets away, but clearly that never leaves Bobby Taylor at all, because he
Yeah.
goes on to lead an adult life. And we have to talk about also what they did with the children, actually, right? So it's important to note that this had nothing to do with the children, right? There's no pedophilia going on here. There's no, they did keep Alex Jones, but the rest of them, they weren't looking to replace their son or anything like that. They were actually attacking the parents in this case, right? It was all about making other people lose faith in God.
Yeah, basically, like have the parents suffer like they
Yeah, and
suffered.
so what they're actually doing with the children is they're drugging them for a period of time, and then they're killing them. However, in the meantime, it seems like they had this kind of this torture practice where they would make the children solve mazes, and they told the children, if you can solve all the mazes, you can go home. And so Bobby Taylor is stuck with this, right? He cannot escape this experience that he went through mentally, and so he is constantly solving mazes because somehow he feels that if he can just solve one more maze, maybe he can be free of all of this. And he never gets away from it, right? So he's stuck doing all these mazes. He's, at some level, he is still reliving this whole thing. So he is recreating the crimes that he went through, right? He is stealing, and not really recreating, but just kind of mimicking them, right? So he's going and stealing or buying,
Yeah,
role
role
playing. There you
playing.
go,
Yeah.
buying children's clothes, also taking children's mannequins, and like acting out the crimes on them, right? Beating them to death and burying them in his backyard. He's soaking these children's clothes in blood. And then I didn't really understand what was going on here, but he had these little locked caskets with snakes in them, and then he had filled them with the blood covered children's clothes. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but it's also made clear that Holly Jones and her husband, they kept snakes. And Alex also has an incident with one of the snakes, so he's terrified of them. But that also clearly rubbed off on Bobby Taylor, and so he keeps snakes in his house. He's trying to walk this line where he's trying to escape all of this, but he can't. So he's keeping all of the elements of his ordeal near him and in his home, and it's kind of consuming him. Man, that's a level of mental illness that I just it was hard to watch him on screen, really, what he was going through, and especially at his eventual suicide. I mean, you could really see the pain on his face. Loki is slamming his head against the table and demanding him to explain, where the children are, or what the maze means, and he's just like, I can't tell you what it means because I don't know what it means, but I can't get away from it either.
Yeah, he's like, hey man, we're looking for the same
Yeah,
answers here.
exactly.
We never get an explanation of why they ended up keeping Alex, but
Yeah,
they
I mean,
just
we
do.
can assume, right? Maybe the first time around or whatever, they were really trying to replace their son, and they end up keeping him, right? Or something along those lines.
So Alex is how we know that like Joy and Anna get kidnapped. So on Thanksgiving Day, when they're out and playing, they come across that RV. It's Alex's RV. Alex is in it, so he sees them. So when Joy and Anna go out on their own to go from Joy's house to Anna's, we can assume that Alex like went up to them or drove up to them and said, "Hey, do you want to play in the RV or get in the RV?" And that's probably how he took them. But I don't think he himself like has the intention to like kidnap the kids and then like hold them. But when he took him home, Holly, being demented and ruthless and waging her war, decides to keep them and kidnap them. And beyond that, that's like the extent of Alex's
Yeah,
role
and
in the
Holly is
kidnapping.
she's pretty explicit about it, right? She points out very.
Yeah, exactly. She wants everyone to know, like, hey, he is innocent of pretty much. He's just guilty of having them play on his RV or
Yeah,
play
and
with
she
him.
says, "I was the one that decided they weren't going home." So, yeah, and
Yeah.
so, Alex, to his, he hasn't escaped his situation either, right? Although he seems to be more, he is the one that is, I guess, displaying more of the Stockholm syndrome type scenario here, but he hasn't escaped his past either because he drives around in the RV and he parks outside this random house and just kind of takes a nap out there or whatever. That house happens to be his childhood home that he was abducted from,
Yep.
which we find out because that's how
Exactly.
Loki actually, he thinks it's odd that this RV was parked outside his house, so he looks into it and he finds out that the people that used to live there had a child abduction happen to them as well. Follows up with them and follows up with the mother, and she says, yeah, I mean, we never found him, and I'm sure that the same people are responsible.
Do you think like subconsciously Alex like knows like this is like where he used
Yeah,
to
I
live or
was wondering
something?
about
Or
that. It's one of two things, right? Either he can't put the pieces together, but he just feels something, and he feels some sort of attraction here, and he keeps going back to this house, and he can't process why that is happening to him. Or on the other hand, he knows, but he can't bring himself to confront it and go and talk to his birth parents, because maybe that would be an admission that he's been an abducted child his entire life. And he obviously has some sort of there's some sort of compassion between him and Holly Jones. So again, he has come to express some sort of sympathy, some sort of love for his captor. So it's mentally, I guess, maybe too much for him. So it's one or the other scenario. But yeah, again, it was kind of jarring to watch. Like, to your point, maybe he is just a slow kid, or maybe the fact that he has an IQ of a 10-year-old is all down to the fact that he went through this as a child and never recovered from it.
I mean, he definitely has some intelligence because he knows not to say what he leads on, like with Keller, tells him like the whole, oh, they didn't cry until I left them. Like he knew not to say that
Yeah,
to the
yeah, it's true.
police,
And I
right?
mean,
He knew not to like mention anything about the kids when he could have easily been like, hey, yeah, I played with them on the RV.
right, knowing what not to say, as much as what he does say, knowing what not to say expresses your intelligence as well, right? So he stays quiet,
Yeah.
other than that one moment where he knows he can get away with it and only Keller will hear him. So yeah, that's definitely true. But yeah, like there is, just like with Bobby Taylor, this, it never gets away from him. I think the other time we see this come out is towards the end, where Keller's getting desperate. He's torturing him in that shower with the scalding water. Alex starts muttering to himself. He's like, I'm not Alex. I'm not Alex. I'm not Alex. And he goes on, there's some other nonsense that he's kind of spewing, but he says something along the lines of, I just wanted to play, and he never showed up. He never came back. I'm not even sure what he's talking about there. If he's referring to, maybe he was waiting for somebody, and that was the incident where he was then abducted while he was waiting for somebody that never showed up. Or maybe he's referring to Holly Jones's father, who he, eventually takes on as a father figure of his own, who then disappears in the middle of the night and never comes back because the priest killed him. I'm not even sure what he's referring to there, but yeah, there's a lot of mental baggage going on here, and rightfully so, obviously, with him and Bobby Taylor. So those are the two kind of victims that we see on screen who kind of survived Holly and her husband's madness. The rest of them, the other 15 or whatever, or 16, I guess, we can assume they were all killed, and that they will be dug up in Holly's backyard at some point, by the police team, as they're kind of excavating that whole backyard.
Yeah, so okay, now we know like there's these 16 kids. We talked about Alex and Bob. How Joy and Anna, they are initially held up like under that like Trans Am outside in like the dugout in
Yeah, the
the
pit outside, underneath the driveway, right?
well, it's not really a driveway. It's just like she has what seemingly is a dead car, but it starts, but people don't know that. And under that, she has like plywood and like which covers the hole that she has dug out for victims. So initially, that's where the girls are, and then she brings them into the house. She did mention like she just like wanted them to like play or something, and that's when Joy happens to escape, runs out of the house, and is found, and that's how she ends up in the hospital. But Anna is still there. Now, this was the creepy part when Keller is informed, like, oh, they found Joy. She's in the hospital. Keller goes to the hospital, and Joy is like looking at him like with fear, and it's like, you were there. And we're like, whoa, what does she mean that he was there? But Keller immediately understands that to be like, "Oh, this is Holly's house for sure. It's Holly's house," because he books it and he like goes straight there. Whereas Loki, who's trying to talk to Keller, assumes that Keller's gonna be going to the abandoned
This is
building.
another case of them being so sure of what they're doing. I mean, Keller, he knows exactly what he wants to do, and he could just stop and tell the police, "Look, it was Holly Jones," and avoid the scenario that happens. But he's going to handle things by himself. He knows what he's doing, and he just takes off. On the other hand, Loki is like, "Oh, I know where you're going, bro. I know where you're going, and I'm gonna see you there." And he heads to the totally wrong
Yeah.
place. He goes to Keller's father's house thinking that, he's going to confront Alex Jones there, which he eventually does find there, but he doesn't find Keller because Keller was not headed there at all.
Well, yeah, so this is where Keller now gets kidnapped, right? Or not kidnapped, but held captive by Holly. Like, get rid of everything. And then she takes him out and puts him in the pit that she has dug out. And she tells him, like, this is where your daughter was. And if you want to see your daughter or have a chance to see her, do as I say. So Keller does do what she says. Like, he handcuffs himself and she shoots him in the leg and he goes into the pit. And in the pit is like where he does have a sign that definitely his daughter was there because he sees her red whistle in there. And then this is like the first time we hear him pray in a while, and he like makes a prayer to God to I think to keep his daughter safe or to help him find his daughter. Also, like you said, Loki, he goes over to Keller's father's house or the apartment. In the apartment, he finds Alex in like solitary confinement in that little like makeshift cellar that or cell that Keller made. And then the police department or the captain or whatever is telling Detective Loki, like, you need to go tell Holly about Alex. Like, Loki doesn't even want to do it. He's like, all right, fine. He like reluctantly goes over. And then when he goes over to Holly's house, that's when he sees that she's acting suspicious. Like when he looks
Yeah,
through
he
the
hears
window.
something and nobody's answering the door, so he steps through the door and yeah, as he's like creeping around, he sees a picture of Holly's husband and notices the necklace around his neck, and it's the same necklace that he found on the body in the priest's home, and it's the same
Yeah.
the necklace is a maze, which is the same maze that Bobby Taylor kept drawing, and at that point it just starts clicking for him that
It pieces everything together for him and he realizes, all right, that this guy was her husband. They've kidnapped people before. So he's like 100% sure at this point that Anna is going to be in the house. And he does confront Holly. Holly has just drugged Anna. She has her gun, so she does shoot at him. Loki shoots her twice. He's dead. I think she grazes, like a bullet grazes Loki's head, at least based on like what you see
yep.
from the injury. He's like bleeding, but he gets Anna. This is one of my favorite scenes. So like this whole like slow burn of the anxiety and like the pressure that's building up, that drive to the hospital, like man, that is fast paced and
You know
gets your
what?
heart
I kept
going.
thinking when I was watching that scene. Yeah, you're right. Like I was on the edge of my seat the whole way. But this is a thriller. We've just been shown who the culprit is, and the culprit was shot dead. The tension in the story should, by all accounts, be winding down at this point, and it just does not. That drive is frantic. He's got he's
Yeah, it's
yeah,
one
I
of my
mean
favorite
that's
scenes.
where things, I mean, really pick up in a different way. I mean, he's bleeding out of his head. It's dripping into his eye. He's swerving. The snowstorm that they had mentioned earlier is finally here. His vision's going blurry. I mean, I felt like I was in the car in that scene. I don't know about you, but I mean, the way he kept he kept tailing every car and like he's swerving and he's almost hitting the car and then swerving out of the way the last minute. I mean, I was getting that feeling in my stomach where, I'm sitting in the passenger seat of a car and somebody's, not driving particularly well. I was getting that feeling just watching that scene.
Yeah, I mean, like he put in a lot of like first person like point of view shots like from inside the car, like the rain droplets are like impede like you can't like his vision is bad, like the blood like you said is getting in his eye. He's
Yeah,
like
we haven't talked a lot about cinematography either, but like I mean that was something that I thought was really special. I mean, I really felt out of it was like an out of body experience. I really felt like I was in that moment. So that's something. There's a lot of moments like that I think, but that's one where it really shined.
most definitely, yeah. So this is like where the movie more or less is like concluding. I mean, it's not over yet, but we found the girls. Everything has been pieced together. Like we, as the audience, Detective Loki, like we know everything that's happened. The only thing that's left is Keller is still holed up in that pit outside of the house. And then so this is kind of interesting. Like I don't know if it's like the next day or a couple days. I don't know how long it's been since Loki gets out of the hospital, and I mean he's clearly still freshly injured. He has like his band-aids on and stuff, and he goes over to Holly's house. Even though the case is over, there's nothing left to be done other than that Keller is still missing.
Nobody thinks that Keller's been hurt or something. Everyone thinks that Keller now that Alex Jones has been found, he's on the run because he's going to be arrested as soon as they find him, right?
Yeah,
So that's actually what everyone thinks
exactly.
is
Yeah.
going on. Nobody's looking for him. I mean, they're looking for him on the run. So
Yeah, so I mean, so we get to that house, you have like the forensic team, like you said, excavating, and like after they leave, we hear like the whistle, so we know like okay, Loki heard the whistle too. He's not even sure about it a few times. Like you see him like make a reaction, like I don't know if I'm hearing things right now or what, but the whistle like repeats it like 3 or 4 times, and then he looks over to the car, and we can assume he's gonna go and find him at this point, but that's where the movie ends. I thought like that last scene was like almost unnecessary, but it just was it really I was glad that they put it in there. I should say that.
I loved that final shot. And I think it plays like a pretty important role because there's something about the way that the movie trails off where, I mean, again, they've hit this balance of they've answered all the questions that you are wondering about in this movie, but there's still enough going on that you're wondering how it's going to play out, and they don't just give you the answers. You know what I mean? That last scene of Loki just kind of listening off in the distance gives you this incomplete feeling. I mean, again, as the credits are rolling, I'm still playing out all the scenarios that are happening after the movie ended. I love the fact that they end it with that and they don't show us what happens. I mean, I can't talk enough about that scene. And that's where most thrillers probably fall flat on their face. Just speaking of the ending, the absolutely terrifying thing is that, like, what would you? This is pretty much a happy ending, right? But there's like some unanswered questions, right? Is that fair to qualify it as a happy ending nonetheless?
Yes, it's a happy ending in the sense that well, neither of the girls die. They come back home safely. This kidnapping ring that was being done by Holly, like that stuff is solved, so there's closure for the other families that may have lost children.
Particularly, Alex Jones gets to go home, right? There's an article that he was, his actual name was Barry, and he was reunited with his family.
So yeah, that is categorically like a happy ending. Like everything works out as it could work out based on the circumstances. Only thing is, Bob Taylor commits suicide, but even that you could say like he was living like a tortured life. Like it's almost like maybe he doesn't have to like live through that
So
anymore.
here's my question on that, though, because I mean, the more you think about it, it's actually kind of, I mean, I just felt so like empty about this ending because there's a bit of a Bobby Taylor is our example of the guy who made it out, right? He was kidnapped for 3 weeks, and then he escaped. He was drugged just like these two girls were. So it's a happy ending in that they make it out. But I mean, as far as what we know about how their lives are going to be extremely difficult. I mean, they were held captive for over a week and they managed to get away just like he is. Mentally, this will probably never leave them. They are Bobby Taylor in a sense, right? And I mean, the one scene that really bothered me was where they wheelchair Anna into Loki's hospital room to kind of say, her mom's like, she wanted to say thank you to her hero. And she just looks dead in her eyes the entire time. She doesn't say a word. She doesn't react. I mean, there's obviously a mental toll that has been taken, and that's probably not coming back.
Yeah, I mean, just as much as the title prisoners is like the physical, actual imprisonment of like the kidnapped kids, it's mostly about like the prison in your mind that you get locked into. And like you mentioned all these examples of Loki, of Keller, and like even now of his daughter, of Bob, of Alex, and even of Holly and her late husband, right? Like they were imprisoned by this, like mentally, to this idea that we have to wage a war against God and have everyone feel like what we
Yeah, they
felt.
couldn't cope with their son's death, so that's a whole prison on its own, right? Yeah, everyone's dealing with something in this movie. I thought that's something that's particularly well done here. But every character, major or minor, is kind of bringing a different perspective in terms of just how they deal with things and dealing with difficulties in your life. So I thought that was really well balanced throughout the movie.
It's masterful. It really is. I mean, based on your score, man, you gave it a 95, I think.
Overall, yeah.
Like
So
overall, like you like this movie. I mean, even with me, I give it an 88, which is great.
yeah.
This is like a must-watch movie for almost anyone. I can't imagine like a type of person that wouldn't enjoy this, unless I guess maybe it's a little gory at
Yeah.
points if like people can't handle the blood or the
You have to have
violence.
the stomach for it. That's about it.
Yeah, for sure. But beyond that, I mean, it's like enjoyable in the sense that it's entertaining. Not that it's gonna, again, it might have a happy ending, but it's not necessarily a happy movie at all.
Yeah, and I mean, like we said, that happy ending comes with a lot of caveats. So I mean, I think there's something for everyone in this movie. As long as you can handle the goriness of it, if you can handle the tension of it, I mean, it is really something special to watch. So
I mean, that tension is what you want, right? I mean, that's what the movie is
yeah,
made
I mean,
for.
that's a
To
thriller defined.
give you that
Yeah,
feeling.
exactly. So one final note, I just got to let you know right now, executive producer Mark Wahlberg. What a genius.
Oh my God, why did you bring him up? It just means he put money in the movie.
You gave a Mark Wahlberg movie an 88. Look at you.
Whoa. He is a executive producer. Doesn't mean anything to me. He has money. Good for him. He knew which project would give him a good return.
Yeah, he knows how to pick them at least, right? So
Okay,
you
yeah,
can
sure,
give him that.
All right, so I guess that's about it, right?
I think that's it. I could talk about this movie ad nauseum, but I think we're in a good spot here. So
yeah, we'll leave it at that. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you would like to keep up with us, please subscribe wherever you listen and check out our website, thetwiceover.com. And follow us at The Twice Over on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you would like to support us, you can do so on Patreon, or you can just tell a friend about this podcast. And finally, if there are any comments or feedback, please email them to us at comments@thetwiceover.com, or you can just tweet at us. The music you hear is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify. We'll be back next week with another episode.